This video is going to document the disassembly and eventual rebuilding of my carburetor removed from a 1960 John Deere 430 two-cylinder tractor. This is a Marvel Schebler updraft carburetor, fairly simple design. Fuel comes in this port here, collects in a bowl at the bottom. Air is drawn in the front, goes up through the intake to the engine, which sits above, the cylinder head sits above the carburetor. That's why it's called an updraft. Not too many pieces to take apart. Fairly easy to do as a little bench project. So hopefully we can dig into this without too much trouble and see what needs replaced or just simply cleaned. I'm going to start by probably just separating the top from the bottom. There's just 4 screws that hold the two components together. Usually you can get a fairly good sized screwdriver. Turn our screws and simply repeat the process. Sometimes they're a little stubborn coming out, but I find the bigger the screwdriver, the easier the turning it is. Helps to have clean entry point for your driver blade. Yeah, I'll try this guy here. First one made it look easy. I find in my projects there's always one bolt or one screw that holds me up. Everything comes out easy except one thing that gets in your way, but we'll eventually get it. It doesn't help that I'm kind of doing this freehand. Sometimes it's nice to have a vise or something holding opposing pressure, but we got them. Out we go. Okay, there's a gasket between these two pieces, obviously, and the only thing that really kind of holds between the gaskets, there's a little venturi, this little yellow bronzy cone that's in there. It kind of sits between the gasket and the two pieces. A lot of times, if I'm able, I try to save the gasket, not because I'm going to reuse it, but I oftentimes will make a pattern out of the old gasket. And let's see, I want to separate him from the top, and I'll just make my own new gasket. There are plenty of rebuild kits out there that you can get new gaskets from, but I'm kind of cheap, and I will oftentimes simply rebuild my own. Now, you can kind of see some separation. The venturi, gasket. Now we also have a float, which is down in this part, so I probably do need to separate my gasket as much as possible from this bottom portion here. I'll just say this is, you can just rip it off of there. I'm just doing this out of being a bit of a miser, but see our float kind of peeking out right there. I think it's inevitable that we're going to get some cracks and some tears in our gasket material, but we're just about there. It'll be enough to make a good pattern out of anyway. And gotcha. So, gasket, float, venturi, upper portion, we'll kind of set him to the side for now, and we got our lower part. The fuel typically sits in this bowl and a little rusty in there, so I imagine that if you tried running this as it was, which of course I wouldn't do, you'd probably get a little bit of a clog in a fuel port. We'll flip our body over. This is simply a drain plug. over time, many people will just simply use a crescent wrench or pliers or whatever to maybe pull that out if they want to check it, so those edges kind of get stripped. I think there's enough here that we can still use our little 7/16 wrench to, to remove him. Take him out there. Kind of cruddy, but that's why we're taking this apart and going through all the trouble. Our load control needle, well, it's a little bent up. All right, we can maybe have some replacements and stuff. It's kind of loose. Take him out. And then up inside, we have this, you can see in there is this nozzle, which sticks up in through this way. Sometimes these can be a little stubborn to get out. There's a position in there for a screwdriver blade. I may have to find a more appropriate screwdriver to fit down in there. The trick is just not to ruin your bite where you put your driver in there. We're going to try and screw that out just as we would undo like a screw in general. We can move on to taking our choke baffle out here. There are 2 screws to hold that in place. For that, we're going to use this little baby screwdriver and see if we can pop those loose. There we go. There's one. Some of these pieces are pretty small. They're kind of easy to lose track of if you're not careful. Okay. The choke baffle has this plate that can be drawn in if the choke is closed, and it's kind of held in there in a spring, and it's sort of split on this shaft, so the actual main blade fits through the center of this shaft, and this guy kind of goes up around. So we'll pull him out. You can see that little plate held in by that little spring right there. And that should allow us to be able to remove our choke shaft. Now, I suppose first I can take this bracket out here, because that may be easier to keep him all as one. There we go. Little screw out of there. And that should allow that whole piece to come out. What is interesting about this is we have this little spring here that kind of goes around our choke shaft, if you will, and then it kind of seats on this clip right here. So we're going to try and remember how that goes back together when we put it back together. And the other thing to note is this little seal right here on our shaft. That might be something to, if you get a kit, that's probably worth replacing rather than reusing the old pieces. Okay, so we have our nozzle, and that'll be the real test. Can we get that nozzle out with this screwdriver? Nope. I need one slightly smaller. One thing I've done to maybe try and make this a little bit easier, and I'm not saying this is going to be the exact, I know in the past I've had a screwdriver where I've ground down the tip a bit to make the end a bit wider, and that allows me to sit in the grooves of that nozzle a little easier and allows a little less play back and forth and gives me a little more torque to try and get it out. But let's see what we got with this one. Yeah, it's going to be a tight one. What we can also try and do is put some penetrating oil in there and see if that may help us. I realize I'm probably out of frame at the moment, but yeah, let's go ahead and get a little penetrating oil and put it down in there. We'll come back to that here in a second, but those can be tricky. That's kind of the toughest part a lot of times of these is getting those apart. In the meantime, set him off to the side, clean off some of our dust. We have our float. The float is simply held in with this little pin right here, and you can just slide that pin out, remove the float, and then with that the gasket will come off. And we have our little needle valve here, and this is what controls with the float. You know, the float kind of raises and lowers, and when the float is down, this little valve will drop down like that, and then when the float raises back up, it will push that valve back in and stop the flow of gas. So it's kind of a little bit of a control mechanism. Sometimes if your tractor's been sitting a while, these little needles can get stuck up in here and it won't allow gas to flow. So that's a common thing that I've had to deal with. This one looks fairly clean, actually. Someone may have replaced that sometime in the past. Our venturi comes out there. You can unscrew this piece where that needle valve sits in. Like I said, that's so clean and new looking. I'll evaluate that. But we're gonna remove this throttle baffle similarly to how we removed the choke. 2 little screws. Hold that in. Throttle baffle simply sits on top of the throttle shaft, so it's not like the choke baffle in that it slides through the center of it. 2 screws. Baffle out. That should allow our throttle shaft to work out as well. We can remove our idle adjusting screw here. A little spring that keeps some tension on that. Be able to clean him up a little bit. One wanted, we could take our little elbow, the fuel inlet elbow, and take him off as well. It's usually a little screen on the end of these. Most times there is. Like that. That one doesn't look too clogged or dirty, so that's good. Our carburetors usually have a part number. It's a TSX followed by a number up here on the front. And across the 40s, 420s, 430s, carburetors are all very similar in their design. I think the later, the 420s, the 430s, were a little different number. If I remember right, this was like a TSX 7 something or other for a 430. Let's see if we can clean it off and prove me right. There we go. Yeah, I'll probably end up scratching that. Or maybe it's a 600. I don't have my, put the old man reading glasses on. I'm getting up there where it's harder to see that close-up stuff. 688, I believe, is what it was, if memory serves correct. So we're not going to go too crazy, but yeah, TSX 688. That's the later style. It may have a difference in terms of the port sizes and how much fuel is delivered and that sort of thing, but we will go ahead and clean the rest of this up, and I'm going to see if I can make some progress on getting that nozzle out of it. So more or less, all we have left is our nozzle stuck in our main carburetor body here. I've gotten to the point where I've decided I may just end up sacrificing the nozzle just to get it out. Now, if you only have the one carburetor, you know, you're probably just as well to leave it in there if you're having a hard time getting it out. Just kind of clean around and squirt some carburetor cleaner through. I've got extras I've had from parts I've taken apart in the past. So just to be, I don't know, thorough, I'll go ahead and take it all the way out, and like I said, I'll put it all back together with parts I already have. But if you're just dealing one carburetor, I mean, you can buy those new aftermarket, but I know they're pricey too. So what's happened is I've meddled with it enough, I've mucked around, that I've kind of gotten the flat blade where it's not going to catch. I just can't quite grab in there to twist or turn. So what I've ultimately decided to do here today is use my bolt extractor set. I'm going to take one of these extractors, kind of tap it down in that center hole, and then hopefully I can use the extractor to see if that's going to turn. Yeah, there we go. You can see our nozzle turning there. So now we just got to spin them out. And he's going to bind a little bit as we go along, it seems. I'm going to do a little back and forth. I'll come out a little bit, go back in a little bit, and while the threads coming out are stripped, or the spline, the slot for the screwdriver coming out is stripped, going back in, it's not. You can tell, just either me or the guy before me. We can blame it on me, I can handle it. We'll say that it's just been abused in its lifetime, so we'll get it out of there, so the next guy that comes along, when I put a replacement in, hopefully will not have any of these issues. Come on out a little. Getting a little tight, but we are getting closer. I'll go ahead and turn them back in a little bit more. You can put a little bit of lubricating oil in here, but luckily this is brass, so the brass should probably give before the threads on the cast carburetor body will. So hopefully just one piece is going to need replaced. Now, these are the one thing, it's always been 50-50. Sometimes these pop right out for me. Sometimes I fight the battle of fighting today, but one way or the other, there we go. We're gonna get him out. You can see just how badly I traumatized him once we have him more exposed here. That seems like he should be most of the way. Should be able to just, again, a vise, extra set of hands. It's kind of helpful in a case like this. But sacrifices we make for education, I suppose. There we go. And we're out. Free and clear. So there. Take him back out of there. And there's our nozzle. The nozzle also has this little gasket here, as you can see. Looks like somebody else was kind of messing with it at some point. That there's a little scratched up, could be why it was stuck in the body. But you can see these little holes. This is where our fuel will kind of move on up, and there's a couple little openings here that basically, just depending on how much fuel the engine's demanding, it'll pass through that. Our piece down here on the bottom, now that it's out, you can kind of see the slot the screwdriver's supposed to fit in. Like I say, one time I had a screwdriver that I ground down so that edge was real flat, and it fit in there real nice, and there was no play, so you could just put in there and try and give it a twist. But so this one had been manipulated enough where that was all stripped out, so if I tried turning out, it just pops right out, and it doesn't matter. We have it out. We can now go ahead and clean those pieces parts all the way up. I will probably take these and put them in the blasting cabinet. Kind of use the power of abrasive to clean everything up, and then we can start to think about putting stuff back together. Now I got to thinking, if I'm going to drop these guys in the blasting cabinet, I might as well finish taking apart the needle valve seat, which usually you can get with a big screwdriver. Just try and span the opening as best you can. It should unscrew out. And I almost forgot about one of the little injector nozzles that's up here in this upper portion, so you have to forgive me for my cobwebs in my mind, but it's been a while since I've taken one of these apart, but we'll manage. There we are, him out there. So that's that guy. And that again is what our little valve sticks up in there, so we'll put him back in there for now. And then this little guy right here, there's a little, if you can see how well he wants to come out. He looks a little cruddy in there, but he might be a little stubborn. Well, it just follows the pattern of everybody else. If I get a little bit, I'll turn a little forward, backward, ease the way out. He might benefit from a little penetrating oil. That little guy kind of looks like he might even be plugged up anyway, so probably two of us to get him out. Feeling something turn. There we go. Little by little, back and forth, back and forth. If not all the way out. Gotcha. It's just a little guy. Right there. Whoop. And again, I believe the carburetor kits are going to have all new pieces that you can use to replace all these things. Considering what I've taken apart here, and all the compromise I have with the nozzle and everything else, I may end up getting a kit for this guy and make it all like new again. Well, back in the days of my youth, I remember I'd be helping my dad with the project and be getting towards the end, and I'd be getting tired. You know, he'd always say, "Oh, just one more thing, one more little bit here, one more minute of sweeping floors, one more piece of the parts that had to come off a machine." There was always one more little project before I could call it a day. And the point of my story is I keep bringing you back because there's one more little jet that's still up in here that I, again, forgot about. So we're gonna kind of do the same thing. This little driver was actually a little bit too big to fit up in there, so I'm gonna use a little smaller one. And just like the last one, it should unscrew. And once we get him out of there, there we are. Here we're going to pull this little retainer, this little brass ring that's kind of seated down in the throttle shaft bore. There's a little seal behind that we're going to replace. So I just take my little hook, or you can use your tool of choice. There's probably something more appropriate for this, but I just try and give it a little pry out. There's our little ring, retainer, and then in there should be our little rubber seal that we have. We're going to replace that, and then that takes care of that little part. There's a little plug on the opposite side that you can also probably punch out this way if one wanted to. I've found those are usually pretty solid, and I mean, it's kind of give or take whether you want to replace that side or not. But seals out, important to replace that. I did some digging through some of my old parts and justified some of my hoarding tendencies. I found a bucket that had all kind of old carburetor parts in it, a lot of leftover pieces from past repair jobs. There's a couple our nozzles there, a load adjustment mechanism that's not all bent up, some idle adjustment screws, a couple different nice things in there. I also found another whole carburetor. I thought, while we're tearing apart and rebuilding one, why not do two? This is also the, I'm not sure if you can see the label, TSX 688, same model. So we're going to do essentially the same thing, tearing this one apart while it's fresh in the mind. You can probably fast forward through this part, or if you're curious, see if I screw something up the second time around. Keep watching. Ooh, little cruddier, little cruddier on the inside than our last one. Oh yeah, that's good stuff. Look at that, nice. Save that for later. Wonder how things are going to come apart on this one. Want to make a bet? Easier, harder. You never know. Sometimes things surprise you. And that takes us back to that guy. If you remember our last carburetor, the load adjust came off easily enough, as we are here. Ooh, more good stuff. Look at that. Yes. Put that on your cereal in the morning. It's good for you. In there we have our nozzle. Moment of truth. Try not to stress it too much, but see if I can give it a little bit of a no way. Look at that. 50-50. Sometimes they come out, sometimes they don't. Never would have thought if this one would have cooperated. Well, we'll take it, that's for sure. Lost my bite. There we are. Right about there. Just gotta be careful not to strip it out on the way out now. I believe we're turning. Yeah. Thought we would have had more progress by now, but still turning, so we'll be patient. Yeah. There we go. Feel it loosening up now. I remember last time, it's right about where we gave the little punch out the rest of the way. Yeah, I think we're there. Little tap. Bingo. So we'll keep our little piles separated for the time being. That pretty much takes care of the main body. The plug was already missing, so we won't worry about that. There's still some gasket on there. We can deal with that later. Move over to our other half. Now, we move on to the blasting cabinet, maybe a little bit of the wire wheel. See what we can do to make these pieces look new again and go back together. We cleaned our carburetor castings in the blast cabinet, just taking the abrasive and cleaning all the paint and rust off, so they're looking pretty nice. My next step is going to be to take some compressed air and blow out the little passages where all our jets and little nozzles will go, just to get all the little dust that the abrasive cabinet may have left behind in there. And I'm going to follow that with some carburetor cleaner, kind of the same deal. Just give it a spray and make sure those jets are clear. No dust, no debris in there. I'll give it a good once over, all the parts. I've decided that having the two carburetors, I'm going to put one together with the pieces and parts that I have. The other, I've purchased a kit from Steiner Tractor Parts that has just about everything you're going to need to put one back together. I think that was $70 for the kit plus shipping. So what we'll do is kind of a field repair, and then like the professional with all the new stuff. I started going ahead and making my new gasket. I used the kit gasket to trace my gasket paper, and I'll take some scissors and I'll end up cutting out the little parts that we'll need cut out on the new gasket. We'll continue doing that for the tiny holes. I used a little punch on a hard bench. You just take your hammer and tap that, and you get the little pieces that come out that way. That's the easiest way I found to do that. That's how I make my gaskets. And with that, we will start putting some stuff back together.